Life After Stroke is a production of the Hang On to the Dream Foundation, the 501c3 nonprofit organization that helps kids and adults reach their goals in life. If these Life After Stroke programs are helpful to you, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the Hang On to the Dream Foundation to assist the organization in its numerous outreach activities. For more information, just go to www.hangontothedream.org. And remember, no matter how hard things seem, hang on to the dream. The following is a recorded program of an actual stroke support group. The comments expressed are the personal opinions of the participants and not necessarily the opinions of the producers, sponsors, or the broadcasters of this show. This program is not to be used as a way to diagnose or treat any medical condition that you may have. Please consult your doctor or healthcare professional before making any changes to your current medical routine.
Stroke.
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 It comes out of the blue, sometimes without warning.
But those who survive it
should never lose hope.
A stroke can be life-changing.
But it is also
a new beginning.
Because for all survivors, there is still a beautiful life after stroke.
Hey everybody, welcome to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing. Today we're broadcasting from our studios here in Hollywood as well as various parts all across the country. And, I know it's been a while since we've done an episode of the show. We've kind of just been falling into the whole COVID routine as everybody else, just kind of hunkered down and just trying to stay one step ahead of old Rona. But we have been meeting online. So for those of you who are stroke survivors, you are more than welcome to be a part of our stroke support group that we hold online every Thursday at 11 a.m. If you go to thestrokechannel.tv. And you'll go there and be able to find out how to get tuned in. But something else that I started probably about 6 months ago, or I maybe getting pretty close to that. I've always kind of had this idea of wanting to do a show or a support group for caregivers. I'm just a little over 2.5 years into this whole stroke thing myself, and really began to realize just what a major role caregivers play in us stroke survivors getting our lives back together. And I just thought, boy, there's so many caregivers out there that I bet they'd love to have their own little powwow and, time to kind of piss, moan, and complain like all of us stroke survivors do in the midst of our stroke. And so kind of one conversation led to another, and one of the gentlemen who participates in our Thursday stroke survivor group, his wife would kind of in the background on Zoom kind of help him get his computer logged in and everything else. And one conversation led to another. And I said, boy, Dr. Peter, do you think your wife Ann would, want to run our caregiver support group? And then Ann and I talked about it. And so here we are. And so every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, we have our caregiver stroke support group. And it is headed up by Ann Parker, who is with us right now, as well as some of the other participants who participate in the caregiver stroke support group. But first, I want to say hello to Ann. Ann, hello, and say hi to everybody who's listening.
Hello to all you people listening out there. You're not alone. There you go.
There you go. Well, Ann, and I've said this to Ann countless times, so it's nothing new that she's going to hear. I just so appreciate her and everything that she brings to the caregiver stroke support group. I kind of participate in it just as a fly on the wall, as kind of the stroke survivor representative, but Ann really just does such an awesome job with everybody who's part of the group. And, I just, a couple of weeks ago, I said, boy, we had just a great meeting the other day, and I thought, oh my gosh, this would have been a great episode of the show, because everybody just brings just so much great information as a caregiver that I knew there's other caregivers out there that listen to our show who would really love some of this great information. So what I thought we would do, everybody, is kind of go around the horn, and throughout this episode, we're going to talk to a number of stroke survivors' caregivers. And they're going to talk about just some of the experiences that they've kind of found themselves in as being a caregiver, and some of the things that they've had to do as an advocate for their loved one. And so, Ann, why don't we start with you, and then we'll kind of go around the horn, and maybe introduce yourself, tell everyone a little bit about how you became a caregiver, and a little bit about Dr. Peter, my buddy, and all that kind of good stuff.
Thanks, Chris. And for those of you listening, Christopher is a team member with us on this caregiver support group. He brings a lot to the group. So just a shout out back to you, Chris.
Look. I find people that can do the job. I'm just the boss sitting next to the person who just does just a great job. But thank you, Ann. That's nice of you to
so he's being humble. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a caregiver for my husband, Peter, who had a stroke about 18 months ago. He had a hemorrhagic stroke. He was not physically impaired at all. So it was a very strange thing as it happened. I wasn't really sure he was having a stroke because he didn't have any of the telltale signs of a stroke except for being extremely confused. Did bring him to the hospital and they ran the tests, and yes, he had a hemorrhagic stroke. So we've been in this about 18 months, feeling our way the whole time. I often felt like I was reinventing the wheel. I knew I wasn't the only person out there dealing with stroke. And there seemed to be a lot of support groups for the stroke survivors, but for the caregivers under more constraints of time, energy, everything else, there didn't seem to be a whole lot for us. And so this has been really a great benefit. Learning lots all the time. And as you are introduced to everybody else, you'll see the same. So I had done caregiving for my mother who had dementia, which was a good lead in to this. There are some similarities as it goes on, but I'll just pass the microphone to the next person who can introduce themselves.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention before we do that, it's interesting, Anne, because if I remember correctly, Dr. Peter had a hemorrhagic stroke, but it was also kind of brought on by an AVM, an arteriovenous malformation. So you can kind of,
Right.
for those of you that are listening, you can kind of speak from kind of both sides of that coin because, I had a hemorrhagic stroke, but mine was not brought on by an AVM.
Right.
Some people have AVMs that aren't hemorrhagic strokes. And as we all have probably heard or we know now, hemorrhagic strokes are the most deadly, unfortunately, and a lot of people don't survive them. So,
and AVMs are rather rare, as
Yes.
we've come to find out,
Mhm.
and the treatment is rather lacking. Let's
Yes.
put it that way.
Sure.
So it's a hard thing to treat, a hard condition to treat, and it has a lot of possibility for re-rupture. But that's another whole.
Yeah, that's a whole other show, and it really is
That's a
because
whole other show.
one of the things about AVM, just to kind of put a little bow on it and wrap up that particular topic, is the fact that if you have high blood pressure, you're going to be more likely to have some type of a stroke. If your blood pressure is super high, that's just kind of what they say. So kind of how to not really prevent it, but in essence you can. But with an AVM, you're born like that. And if your blood pressure is fine and you don't smoke, don't drink, you look both ways before you cross the street and, pet puppies and all that, you could live just the best life. And boom, that AVM just kicks in and, you don't really go to get a checkup for an AVM. I mean, you'd have to go in and have a CAT scan and an MRI. So there's really not a way to kind of check and make sure if you're okay. It's in there. And some people live and die with it, never acts up. Some people, it just crops up. And so, so that's really interesting, Ann. And for those of you who are interested in participating in our caregiver support groups, that we have on Wednesdays, if you care for someone who's had an AVM, maybe you can be a part of our group going forward, and you can ask Ann some of the questions personally through our stroke support group for caregivers. So that's awesome. Thanks, Ann. We're going to continue to around the table. Let's go over to Miss Tiffany. Tiffany, introduce yourself to everybody who's listening and kind of talk a little bit about your loved one who you are a caregiver for.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany, and I am a caregiver for my husband who had a same kind of stroke that Anne mentioned about the hemorrhage stroke. And it's happened when we were on a plane mid-air for coming home from Florida. So for like 2.5 or almost 3 hours on a plane, that he was pretty much kind of like having stroke, but there was nothing we could do about it. We end up reaching UCLA Stroke Center afterward, and now he's like paralyzed on the right side. And everything changed since then for the worse. His personality changed. I'm pretty new to all this. Still today, after 17 months, something is still new, changing every day, challenging, but we cope with it.
And Tiffany, I could only imagine what it would be like to be 35,000 feet in the air and have your husband. I mean, were there signs before he got on the plane? Was it? I mean, I can't. I mean, talk about being helpless. It just you're in midair, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, well, he had a mini stroke like a year before, and prior to that, he also had like heart condition and also bypass heart surgery. So pretty much he always have high blood pressure, high cholesterol. On the day that we, coming home, I could see that he was very, very slow in responding, even walking. But I thought it was one of, normal thing that when he travel, he's not, as easy himself. So I thought it was just one of the anxiety and maybe the medication that he took in the morning. It's kind of have some kind of effect on him. He was very slow in responding in the airport when they asked him for a driver license. So I noticed that. So I was helping him, but at the same time, so he kept like acting similar to that kind of situation whenever we travel anyway. But now looking back, it was much slower than before. So, but then, he was able to get into the seat and was able to take a nap.
And then, if I remember correctly, I remember you mentioning how you guys weren't sitting next to each other. I think you were a seat apart or something like that, and you looked over towards him and you noticed something wasn't right, or?
Yes. So, luckily, I think it's about 2 hours into the flight, they're starting to serve beverage. And so I noticing that the flight attendant was trying to talk to my husband, but it took a long time because I know that he always liked Coke. And so it should be, simple. But it took a long time for the flight attendant to kind of like, recognizing what he was saying. So I'm starting to trying to help by reaching over. And at that time, he was already trying to hold a can of Coke, but he couldn't. So he looked over to me, but because of the noise in the airplane and everything, he tried to say something to me. I couldn't understand, and I couldn't hear anything. I kept saying, what, and by the time I turned to his face and look at his face, I could see the half of his face already drooped. And he kept pointing, I think, using his left hand side, pointing to the right hand, that he couldn't hold the cup. So, and then he pointed down to like his leg. At that time, I couldn't understand what was going on. He's trying to say something I couldn't understand. So he then, I then look at his face, and that is like the this kind of like a sign, give it away, that I was thinking in my head, well, he probably have a stroke. So then I was starting to get the attention from flight attendant. I told him, I think my husband probably having a stroke. So I asked if he could help to find out if there's a doctor on the airplane. Yeah. So luckily there was one.
And you were flying from where back to California? Where were you flying from?
Florida.
From Florida. And how close back to home were you? Just like a couple hours out, 2 or 3 hours out still?
Yes, about almost 3 hours out. Yeah.
And then when you mentioned it to the flight attendant and they found a doctor on the plane and all that, did they offer to put the plane down someplace and take him off, or how did that continue to unfold?
Yeah, so it was notified to the captain, and they offer me to, if we would like to, turn
Land.
around and landed somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, when they was announcing on the airplane to see if any physician on board, and there was a physician, she worked for Kaiser, and she from like Orange County of
Mm-hmm.
Kaiser. So she came up and kind of like trying to take the vital sign and everything, and she's saying that yeah, he having a stroke. The problem is at that time because nobody could tell what kind of stroke that he has.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a blockage, then you need to take action right away.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a hemorrhage there. Basically, if you get into the hospital, there's nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Even at the hospital, they could do.
But wait anyway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but wait anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a very tough decision for me to make, because she was saying that if we turn around and landed somewhere, chances are he won't be able to see a physician for at least 2 hours or 3.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost the same time that we would like go straight,
Mm-hmm.
to LAX and go to UCLA. Especially at UCLA, they have the best stroke center.
Mm-hmm.
And so during that time, my husband was still awake. And so many times he tried to communicate, but nobody could understand what he was saying.
Mm.
And at that time, we offered pen and pencil for him to write on. He couldn't because he's right-handed, but it's impacting his right hand.
Mm.
And so during 2.5 hours, we didn't know what exactly in his mind. The only kind of, helpful thing was that he wasn't passed out anything. He was able to kind of give us signal. So finally, he was able to let us know that he wanted to go home to UCLA. He doesn't want to turn around and So that's what we did. But it was very, very tough 3-hour flight for me.
Absolutely.
Because I feel so helpless.
Absolutely.
Hopeless. And, I was thinking, oh God, if something happened to him on a plane, that would be my fault. You know,
look, everybody that listens to this show, you've heard me give my disclaimer, so I'm not going to give it again. This group knows my disclaimer. I'm looking at Ann on Zoom. She already knows what I'm about to say. Everybody that listens to this show with any kind of regularity, I'm a crier. So I'm just letting you know at some point during this show, I'm sure I'm going to cry. I'm already crying now. You just don't know it, and I'm trying to fight through it. The reason I say that is because Tiffany, first of all, everybody on Zoom, we see Tiffany's got this great smile. We just love Tiffany. We love us some Tiffany. Tiffany, it breaks my heart to think that it's tough enough to have your loved one have a stroke, and it's tough enough to be there witnessing it. I cannot imagine a more terrible place to be than to be in midair, 35,000 feet in the air, hundreds of people on the plane, and you've got this pressure of like, okay, my husband's having a stroke. I don't want to inconvenience anybody, but my husband's having a stroke, okay? And, look, how do I make this decision? If I make the wrong decision, is it going to be worse or better? Tiffany, my heart goes out to you, sweetie. I can't even imagine. But, and we've talked about this before, that the decision that was made was the right one in the grand scheme of things because he was having a hemorrhagic stroke. Again, if he was having an ischemic stroke and everybody waited, well, then, yeah, time is brain, as they say in the stroke world. But in this case, it really wasn't going to make much of a difference anyway, as you have said and have since found out that because of the speed of the plane and the time it would take to get to LAX versus turn around and go to some regional hospital and then have to get him out of there to someplace else, because you have to go to a comprehensive stroke unit, to get the right kind of stroke care. So, it worked out. But really, this is, again, everybody, why I wanted to do this show, because as a stroke survivor, stroke is a mess. I mean, I would use the B word, but I mean, it is terrible enough. I can't imagine for a loved one to be handed this decision Here, let me dump this in your lap. Okay. Your loved one's having a stroke. You're 35,000 feet in the air. Now decide how you want to play this. It's like, gee whiz. So, yeah. Were you going to say something, Ann?
I was just going to punch in, and not to go into any depth, but the decision process is one of the biggest changes with with your partner having a stroke.
Mm-hmm.
As Tiffany said, she's on the plane thinking, what do I do? What do I do? Well, normally this would be something you'd be talking to your partner about. And it was almost a foreshadowing, because I think all of us have felt that we're on the hot seat all the time for the most part. And it's a burden that you're not really prepared to take, no matter what you think you are prepared to take. It's a shock that suddenly it's your game.
Sure. And to have such limited options at that moment in Tiffany's case. I mean, you can't just dial 911 and tell the ambulance to get over here and hurry. I'll meet you at the front door. I mean, yeah.
Plus, I think it's the guilt that you carry too,
Mm-hmm.
of, woulda, shoulda, coulda.
Mm-hmm.
If I just hadn't done this, if I had done that, if I had just been there at that moment, why didn't I see it? Why didn't I vision this? Why didn't I prepare better? That sense of guilt is something you just carry around.
And you know what? First of all, that's Karen, and we're going to come to Karen next on that topic, because I know Jonathan, who's another one of our caregivers who's on the group with us today. As many of you know, I lead a stroke survivor support group on Thursdays. And Karen, I have heard that come up several times from caregivers who say, oh man, if I had just done this, if I had just done that. You've heard me talk about this for those of you that listen to the show on our stroke survivor show, where Cassie's husband, who he was the trumpet player on the Tonight Show for like 5 years and all that. Well, he had gone to work, and Cassie was at home, and she had her stroke, and he came home and found her. And we talked about this at length during one of the episodes. He carried around guilt for like 5 years over the fact that, why didn't I get home sooner? Why did I have to, and I said, look, we talked about this on the air. I said, look, that's your woman, that's your wife. If you'd have known that she was having a stroke or was going to have a stroke, you never would have left the house. But if she'd have called you and said, hi, honey, I'm having a stroke, if you'd have said, oh, okay, great. Well, listen, honey, I'm sitting here with Jay Leno, we're having a beer. So stop having that stroke, and I'll be there when I get there. You know what I mean? That did not happen, so I say this to say, for all of you caregivers that are listening, if you're carrying around 1 ounce of guilt, I got to tell you, first of all, stop, because these are your loved ones. If you'd have known at any time that this was a possibility, you wouldn't have gone to the grocery store, you wouldn't have gone to work, you wouldn't have hung out with your buddies, whatever it is that you did, you would not have done that. This is your person. This is your loved one. You would have been on there and done your thing, And so, and then the other thing, and I'm not talking out of school because you can listen to the episode where we talked about this with Lee and Cassie. Lee then also carried around the guilt that when he got home, he packed her up, threw her in the car, and drove her not to the local hospital or the local urgent care or anything. He drove her to her hospital where she is known and has had some other treatments and stuff like that. So he drove her to her doctor, which was to USC, I think it was, or UCLA, one of the big hospitals. I mean, he took her to her doctor. And he carried around the fact that, oh man, why didn't I take her to a closer hospital? Why didn't I, and I was like, Lee, all these coulda, shoulda, wouldas, like you said, Karen, if coulda, shoulda, then you woulda. But my point is that, I was telling him, look, you took her to who you thought was the best to take her to. So, okay, so you drove an extra 15 minutes, but you trusted where you were taking her. You were taking her to a known thing. So you were making a decision based upon as much fact as you had. You didn't have any fact about the regional hospital or the urgent care down the street. You didn't know what you're going to find there, but you took her to her doctor. So that was a very valid and great idea. While we were having this conversation, you guys can listen to the show, go back a few episodes. Cassie chimed in and on the air said, well, honey, but think about this. If you hadn't done that, I could have had the second stroke at home. And we all kind of looked at her like, well, wait, what? She had a second stroke, but she had the second stroke in the hospital. So I said, Lee, how about you cut yourself some slack? If you hadn't gotten home at all, or if you'd have dragged your feet and had an extra beer with Jay Leno or whatever, she would have had the second stroke at home, and we might have a whole totally different conversation here. So I go on this little bit of a rant in the middle of this conversation, everybody, to all my caregivers out there, because I know you guys, these are your people. If you could have prevented this, you would have. If you could have taken the bullet for them, many of you would have. I understand that. But if you're carrying around the guilt that, oh, why didn't I get home sooner? Maybe this and that. Stop. Just let it go. Okay, it is what it is, number one. Number two, if you'd have known that it was coming, you would have made much different decisions, I'm sure. And so that's my rant on that. So anyway, Karen, thank you for allowing me to go on my little rant. Everybody listening, this is Karen, and Karen is also one of our stroke support group caregivers who's part of our group on Wednesdays, and she just has a ton of experience on a lot of different levels in terms of not just being a caregiver for her husband, but she was also a caregiver for, I think it was your father or your mother.
That's right.
Yeah. So kind of tell us how you kind of became a stroke caregiver, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, as we all feel, the job of that stroke caregiver it's almost 2 years now for me. And unfortunately, my husband was alone for his stroke. I was not home. It was an ischemic stroke, and he wasn't found soon enough to be given any TPA or anything. They also couldn't retrieve the clot, so he still has that. It affected his right side, so his left brain. He has aphasia from it. Initially, they told me expect him to come home in a wheelchair, and I was fortunate enough to have the man walk out of rehab in a month. So he's a strong guy and relatively determined. I think one of the hardest things was later down the road, he developed seizures. And nobody prepared me for that. Nobody told me that was a possibility. So that was a big surprise. And a lot of regression, and that's taken us over a year to try to find the right medicine, the right doctors, the right treatments. But at this point, I think we have a good group together, and they have a plan, and we're executing it, and we're hopeful. But yeah, the day in, day out of the responsibility for someone who is cognitively impaired is very difficult. Very difficult. And I was fortunate enough to find all you people. It was a little later in the game, but it's nice to have a group to share and talk with and just shoot ideas off of. So thank you, Christopher, for putting this together for us.
Oh, no. And, I'm going to keep going around the horn, but one of the things that we're going to talk about after the break is something that I've really learned from you, is that it's okay to be an advocate for your loved one. You've talked about how during your husband's treatment following his stroke, there's been times where you've kind of had to raise your hand and say, you know what, I think I'm gonna find a different doctor. You were not afraid to ask questions. You were not afraid to kind of question certain things. And then coupled with the fact that, as you mentioned, he has these seizures, you've kind of had to, doctor shop. And I mean that in a good way, not, in terms of drugs that people, how they doctor shop for that. But you've had to kind of doctor shop for the right doctor who could address his seizures. And you've kind of learned along the way that a doctor is not a doctor is not a doctor. So your stroke doctor may or may not be the best person to address his seizures,
That's 100% correct. 100% correct. The initial doctor we were seeing was, now that I know it, I didn't know it then, but now that I know it, wasn't really addressing his needs correctly. And it led to more trauma for him. It led to worse seizures. And so we ended up at a teaching hospital. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I've since learned that not only is a neurologist, but then there's specialties within neurology. And that's why I said there's a team now. There's not just one neurologist treating him. There's different ones for all the different ailments and difficulties he has. And it's helped exceedingly. It really has to be this fine-tuned kind of treatment. It really has helped.
I want to do a whole segment on this, which is why I kind of want to keep going around the room, but I have to stop and pause one more time and ask you, were you initially afraid to kind of question a medical authority when you kind of saw that maybe something
No, so
didn't
that's
look
not
right?
me.
Okay.
That's not me. However, the medical community, I didn't feel support from, which was interesting. I went to our general doctor and said, "Is there anybody else? This relationship is not working out for us. What do I do?" And I was told, "No, there isn't anyone else." And then I went to the internet and did research and found a place, but then I had to wait months to get into that. And in the interim, he's being treated by somebody that really wasn't capable to help him. And there were more complications, and it ended up in another ER visit. And that's kind of what bounced us out, because it was emergent. It was an emergency. And that's how we found this next group of doctors. I was actively seeking, but not finding anyone. And that was hard.
You know, you guys, everybody listening, this is why this episode is so important, because I know there's a lot of you caregivers out there that, you know, have some questions, but you don't want to rock the boat. You know, you say, well, I'm not a doctor, so this guy's a doctor, so I guess, you know, what he says is right. You know, and that's not to say that doctors are giving you bad information, but as the caregiver, you know, as Karen and some of the others, as you'll hear, it's okay to say something's not okay. You know, it's okay to say, you know what, I think we got to get another opinion or whatever. And again, and like I mentioned, you know, the thing that we learned from Karen from this group was that she had found that the doctor who was right for one particular situation with her husband having had a stroke was not exactly the right doctor for the other things that were happening as a result of his stroke. So the neurologist did not make such a great, you know, seizure doctor, or the seizure doctor didn't make such a great stroke doctor. You know, one did not necessarily be the end all of end all. You know, it was not an all in one kind of doctor. And that it did require a team. It did require her to do some calling around and some Googling and things like that to put together the right team to help her husband through this. So it's really interesting. We're going to touch upon that again. Let me keep going around the horn here. Miss Trina, say hi to everyone and tell them a little bit about your loved one.
Hi, I'm a caregiver for my husband, who had a stroke a little over 8 years ago. And his was a hemorrhagic stroke, also a brain bleed. And it was very unexpected because he was very healthy at the time. He was about 53 years old, I think. And he was a hiker. We didn't know of any risk factors. His cholesterol was great. He had never had any blood pressure problems, so it was very much a surprise to us, a shock, when he had his stroke. And it was on the right side of his brain, so his left side is affected. He lost the use of his left hand and has just minimal use of his arm. And he walks with a brace called an AFO, and also uses a cane. But he's very handy around the house. He's able to do a lot of woodworking and using equipment that he's adapted for himself, that he can use with only his right hand, and a foot pedal and clamps. And so over the 8 years, he's figured out ways to do what he wants to do. Although he's had to retire on disability.
For those of you who have listened to a lot of our episodes, you've heard me talk about her husband many times. You know, when I went to my very first stroke support group after I got out of the hospital, I had never met anybody that had a hemorrhagic stroke. And from being in the hospital for a month and a half and going to Dr. Google and Dr. YouTube and not finding anything, which then spurred me to create the Stroke Channel and Life After Stroke and all that other kind of stuff, because I would have loved to have had the Stroke Channel and Life After Stroke when I had my stroke, because I didn't know anything about stroke. I knew people had strokes. I knew the old lady down the street who went to church had a stroke. You know, you just think it happens to old people and happens to other people like it would never happen to you. And so, you know, I remember laying in the rehab hospital and on my phone, Googling hemorrhagic. And I'm like, Mom, what do they call it? Hemorrhagic? How do you spell it? And not finding anything. And the things I did find about hemorrhagic stroke was that it has the highest mortality rate. 50% of us die in the first couple days after having one. And all this stuff, I was finding nothing good. And all I found was ischemic stuff. That's all I ever found was just ischemic stuff. So anyway, I went to my first stroke support group, and there was a bunch of people. And whenever there's a new person, you go around the horn, introduce yourself. And so when I introduced myself, Christopher, I had a hemorrhagic stroke, and right as I said that, Trina's husband said, "Wow, I had hemorrhagic stroke too." And I looked at him, and it was just like, as you can tell, I'm upset about it because I was so glad to meet Trina's husband. Because all I heard was just bad things about hemorrhagic strokes. I figured maybe we all die. I don't know. And, he had said that at that point, he had had a stroke maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 years prior or something like that. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, so I guess, okay, well, at least I know we can live at least 3 or 4 years. It was like, and I've told Trina this many times, and certainly I've told her husband this countless times, he was such an important inspiration for me at a time when I had no inspiration. I mean, you guys have heard me even say on the show before, I would have paid somebody to walk in my hospital room that had had a stroke a year before, 2 years before, just so I can see what you look like. Let me just see you walk. Let me see you talk. Tell me how it was and how it is now, so I have something to compare it to. And that's who Trina's husband became for me. So, tell him I said hi first of all. But
I will.
Yeah. Let's go around the rest of the room and we'll come back to everybody. Sorry, guys. You know how I get. Yeah. Miss Louise, we got Miss Louise on here, and I got to tell you, Miss Louise, she's kind of our comic relief. I love Louise. Yeah. Louise, when I told Louise we were going to do this show last week or a couple weeks ago, remember, Ann, she goes, well, I'll try to be on my best behavior. And we're like, no, Louise, you can just be Louise. Don't worry. So anyway, Louise, introduce yourself to everybody and tell them about who you care for and all that.
Well, I am Louise. I'm the mom of not much. He's not about the same age as Trina's husband. He was 53 or 52 or 53 when he had the stroke. It was about a year and a half ago. And it didn't affect anything physical, except maybe his enunciation. I imagine he had it on the Gold Line, either going to or probably coming back from work. He was working in downtown LA and he would take the Gold Line. And he got himself home. And he showed up and probably just went into his room and crashed. And, we don't have vital conversations, we just kind of mind our own business. So it took me a while to notice. And the only thing, he walked, he could take showers, he could do his laundry, he could cook and eat, but he had zero affect. Total, I mean, you look at him like he was just no affect. If you talk to him, he would just stare. And and I didn't know what it, people said to me, well, what did they say at the hospital? And I'm going, well, I never thought of taking him to the hospital. The first place I took him was a mental health clinic from the county, just because that was my thought. And my brother used to work there, so that was just my thought. And they took one look at him and said, you got to see a doctor. And when he walked into the doctor's office, the staff and the doctor and everybody that knew him just automatically knew there was something really wrong.
But they didn't quite know it was a stroke, though. They just knew something wasn't right about him.
No, but the doctor ordered the MRI right away. Mm-hmm. Because he had zero affect, and he was the kind of guy that would, he had a salesman personality, like an annoying salesman personality. Hi, you guys, backslap, talk, and never had any content. But anyway, and so that sent us to the MRI. The thing that I find the most frustrating, and I wish, what you said, what I wish I knew, I still don't understand the insurance system. And because of the COVID, we had to stop the speech therapy, and anything that was helping him, we stopped about a year ago, not quite a year. And his inability to interface with people, things had escalated with attitude. And I called the neurologist back, and they said, oh, well, your insurance qualification has relapsed. You'll have to go over. And I remember I would spend, it was like a job. It was like a part-time job, getting on the phone, sitting for a half an hour or more, talking to this person who referred me to this person, and 2 hours later, and I'm not exaggerating, it could have been 4. 2 hours later, somebody say, well, I have the number for you. And I take it down, and then I go, expletive, this is the number I called originally.
Mm-hmm. Well, Louise brings up a really great statement in terms of, dealing with insurance. I mean, it really could be a full-time job by the time you go through all the phone calls and the phone prompts and this department and that department. And that's certainly an episode of the show that I'd also like to do in the future, is to have someone come on to kind of walk everybody through, some of the pitfalls and avoid some of the little landmines as you try to circumnavigate around this insurance nonsense. Because as a stroke survivor, I can tell you right now, a stroke survivor couldn't handle it. I mean, it would make our head explode with all the nonsense, which is why, again, all of you caregivers are so valuable in that respect.
And the thing that made it really hard was the HIPAA regulations, because
absolutely.
Every time I'd get on the phone to talk to someone
on his behalf,
I'd have to give him the phone.
Yeah.
And if he was in the mood, he'd say, yeah. But
I think there was one phone call you mentioned where they were really trying to push him, and you're like, well, he had a stroke. It was a couple of weeks ago you were telling us about it, how somebody they wanted to hear him and they wanted this. And, it's like, look, lady, if he could do all that, he wouldn't have had a stroke.
And they don't understand. They don't understand he can't form thoughts. And I'm trying to think of a polite way that they will understand that won't offend him, but will still tell the truth, because they don't understand cognitive delay and aphasia.
Well, that's really what makes all of you caregivers so important, because, again, as a stroke survivor, we could not even deal with all of that nonsense, all the phone calls and this and that and the other and everything else that we need. And that's just another reason why you caregivers are so important. And in the midst of caring for us, just in helping us get dressed, get to our appointments and things like that, you then, as it was put, do a full-time job almost on the phone trying to get our benefits and things like that. Jonathan, you are kind of the male representative of the caregivers. So many times you think of caregivers being wives and females and things like that, and you're the male rep here. Introduce yourself to everyone and kind of tell them about how you found yourself in this caregiving position.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan, and my girlfriend's name is Jan, and she had a stroke in August of 2017. Prior to the stroke, she told me that she gets grand mal seizures, but she was on medication for that. But she said, if I ever get one, do not call an ambulance. And I said, why not? She said, because they'll just take her to the hospital, and then they'll take her driver's license away. And I said, okay, fine. But I said to myself, I'll just think about that when the time comes. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so then in August, her mother was gone for the month of August. And so Jan goes over there and takes care of certain things for her mother. So she'll stay there 2 or 3 nights at a time. And I will be at my place. And so our place. And so we don't really see each other. So on on like a Sunday evening or a Monday, I don't remember exactly, I called up and said, hi, how you doing? She said, fine, blah, blah, blah. I said, good night, love you, good night. Next morning, I call to see how she's doing. No answer. I don't think about it. So she's not. I left a message. By about 1 or 2 o'clock, I didn't hear from her. I called again, no answer. And now I'm starting to get a little worried. So I rush over there. It was about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And she was just sitting on the couch staring blankly at the wall. And I said, "Sweetie, are you okay?" No answer. I go, "Did you have a seizure? Is that what this is? Is this," because I didn't know what it was. Is this a seizure? No answer. I'm like, "Oh my God," and I said, "Okay." I just said, I'm just taking you to the hospital. And at first she said no. And I said, "What do you mean no?" I go, "I'm taking you." We took her to the hospital. And of course it was too late for the procedure to be done. And, then of course she went through, I call it the three therapies: occupational, speech therapy, and physical therapy until her insurance ran out. And, I didn't know what to do or where to go, and I had no idea there was even these support groups out there until a friend of mine, she's a psychologist. She said, "Did you ever try finding out about a support group?" I said, "No." And then I looked online, and there was Christopher's group, and I'm telling you, this man is a godsend.
Oh, no.
I mean, if it wasn't for you, Christopher, I'm sorry, I'm giving you some little accolades.
Mm-mm.
I don't know where Lynn and I would be, because she appreciates you so much. We all appreciate you. You have just been stellar with everybody. And then
Absolutely.
Now that I'm on this caregivers thing with Anne, I'm just like, it's almost like I'm completing full circle. I'm getting the answers. I'm getting some of the answers I should get. I'm getting some of the, we talk on this thing about guilt and things like that. And it's just wonderful to have that experience with everybody else. And what I've learned, quite frankly, is that just like the adage is, there's no two snowflakes ever alike. Well, there's no two strokes ever alike.
Mm-hmm.
Either it's eczemic or hemorrhagic.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it affects differently. Like Jan, she lost her peripheral vision on her right side. She has right side weakness, but she can walk. She's ambulatory. She was a yoga instructor, certified yoga instructor, before she had a stroke. So I think that's what also helped her a lot physically. I have seen my girlfriend improve, especially with the aphasia, with her ability to find words, and the words are there. And with Christopher's help, I don't help her when she can't. When she's searching for the words to say, Christopher said, "Don't help her, Jonathan. She knows the word is there. Let her go and find it." And so I'm doing it. It's hard because you always want to be there to help your person, and that's the thing. A caretaker's dilemma is: are we doing enough, or are we doing too much?
Right.
Or where is that line that we have to walk?
Well, first of all, you, sir, and your lovely girlfriend, Jan, I just love you guys to death. So thank you for the very kind words. But, you guys have become family to me. And I feel like I've become family to you. And so I appreciate all that. One of the things that you're talking about, Jonathan, for everybody listening, Jonathan asked me about a year or so ago, he says, sometimes I see her struggling with a word that she's trying to remember. And, I want to help her, but, should I not? When is it too much? What do I do? Because I don't want to see her just sit there and suffer trying to find this word. And I said, well, you kind of have to remember that it's kind of like a baby learning to walk. You could always carry the baby, but the baby's never going to learn how to walk because he never has the opportunity to walk because you're doing all of the carrying for them. And so, my feeling is, with all of you caregivers out there, if you find your loved one searching for that word or, trying to struggle or do something, I kind of do the three, and you've heard me talk about this, and we may even air the promo during this show, kind of a 3 tries rule. Let the person struggle for at least 3 times. And then if you need to, then kind of step in and give them a little hint or something. Because what's happening in the brain, and I've talked about this in other episodes, is wherever that part is in their brain that they're not able to do anymore, that is a vacant field. Just picture a house that used to be there. It's not there anymore. It's just an empty field. So whatever was the center for, movement or memory or whatever, to that degree, that is empty and it's not coming back. But what does happen is other parts of the brain says, the house burned down next door. No kidding. So where's that family living now? They got no place to live. Well, we got some spare rooms here. Why don't we bring them into our place and they can live here? That's kind of what happens in your brain. Other parts of your brain takes on the role that the original part could no longer do. But it just has to learn that, It's like, okay, well, I've never been a fist before. I've never been a foot before, but I can be a foot. I'm really the elbow guy. I'm the elbow part of your brain, but I can help your foot move. Just kind of show me how it works. And the reason it's kind of a weird analogy, but this will help you, for all of you listening. When I was in the hospital, and you may have heard me say this in other episodes, the therapist looked at my foot and said, okay, Christopher, move your foot. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just think I'm moving my foot like Flipper. And he's looking at me and I'm looking at him like, okay, what? He's looking at me and he shakes his head, no. And I go, what do you mean, no? He goes, it's not moving. I go, yeah, really? And I look down, my foot's not moving an inch. But in my brain, it's just moving like crazy. And so I said, oh, okay, well, hang on. Let me find it. If I said, let me find it once, I said it a million times. And I remember looking up at the ceiling. I remember picturing all the ceiling tiles in my hospital room because I was looking up into my brain, basically trying to find foot again, because it wasn't where it always was. In my brain, I was moving my foot, but that part of the movement for my foot was lost in the stroke. So now I have to find where foot moved to. Some other part of my brain said, okay, well, we'll be the foot. We'll help his foot move. But it's almost like taking your silverware drawer in your kitchen and rearranging the silverware and putting it in another drawer. The silverware's in your kitchen somewhere. It's just not in the same drawer it used to be. So now you have to go into all the drawers to find out where the silverware moved to. And so that's kind of my explanation to Jonathan from like a year ago, which is when those things happen, let them kind of search around the kitchen for that silverware. They'll find it. But you have to let them look for the silverware. Otherwise, they'll never be able to find the silverware on their own if you're constantly bringing the fork to them. We're going to say something, Karen?
So it's interesting that you say that because I can visibly see my husband go through that in his own way, too.
Mm-hmm.
He can positively sense the dead part of his brain, and you'll see him close his eyes and he'll make a motion like he's switching to the part that works,
mm-hmm.
and searching for something. And then it takes him a while, and sometimes he gets it, and sometimes he doesn't. And he opens his eyes, he goes, okay, it's this. And he'll tell you that's what he's doing. He goes, I can't use that side. I can't use that side. It's not working.
Yeah, it's
really interesting you said that.
It's such a crazy thing, a stroke brain, I'm very aware of how my brain was before the stroke and how it is after the stroke. I cannot... It's crazy. That's all I can tell you. And to try to describe it would sound even crazier. But as I give you my long-winded analogies, that's really kind of what's happening in our brains is we're trying to find where it's at. We know we still have a foot and we know it's still there because it's there. It's just that what used to make it move is no longer there. But because of neuroplasticity, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard that phrase, that's what basically that is that other parts of the brain will take on that role. They just have to learn how to do it because they've never been a foot before. Again, they've always been the elbow or whatever. We've gone around the horn. What I'd like to do, let's take a break and kind of decompress for a minute. And then when we come back, all of our guests here on the show today have such insight into so many areas that I know a lot of you listeners are dealing with. And it's interesting, we have a chat window because we meet via Zoom and we're doing this via Zoom, but we have a chat window that is usually never filled like it is right now. Everybody's being so well behaved because we're taping this, but normally people would be jumping in like, oh my gosh, me too. And so just to tell you, a lot of your chats, because all of you have kind of not wanted to interrupt, but you've all, as somebody has spoken, a lot of you have put into the chat a lot about guilt. When we were talking about guilt a few minutes ago, a lot of you were like, oh, me too, me too. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a break and we'll come back and let's talk about caregiver guilt and some of the guilt that some of you caregivers may be carrying around, not just the ones who are part of this show, but also the ones who are listening. I'm sure you guys will get some insight from that. And I also want to talk about something that we talked about a few weeks ago during our group session, everybody, was when you talked about how the things that you wish you knew while your loved one was still in the hospital that would have helped the transition of them coming home. It's like, your loved one is in the hospital for, 2, 3, 4 weeks, sometimes even longer. Nobody ever prepared you for this. Nobody ever told you to look out for that. And all of you had such really great comments and insight into that a couple of weeks ago, which really kind of spurred the reason for me wanting to do this show. So anyway, let's sit tight and we'll be right back. Life After Stroke is a production of the Hang On to the Dream Foundation, the 501c3 nonprofit organization that helps kids and adults reach their goals in life. If these Life After Stroke programs are helpful to you, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the Hang On to the Dream Foundation to assist the organization in its numerous outreach activities. For more information, just go to www.hangontothedream.org. And remember, no matter how hard things seem, hang on to the dream. Hey, this is Christopher Ewing, and I'd like to invite you to be a part of two really cool stroke support groups. If you're a caregiver, join us online every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time for the Life After Stroke Caregivers Stroke Support Group. Exclusively for caregivers, this is a time where you can connect with other caregivers from around the world and share stories and gain encouragement as you care for a loved one who has had a stroke. And if you're a stroke survivor, then join us on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Time for the Life After Stroke Online Stroke Support Group, where you'll get the chance to meet other stroke survivors and gain insight, information, and inspiration while on your road to recovery. For more information on these two great support groups, just go to www.thestrokechannel.tv. That's thestrokechannel.tv, because there's still a beautiful life after stroke. Hey everybody, welcome back to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing, broadcasting from our studios here in Hollywood. And with us, we have a whole panel of caregivers who are talking about being a caregiver for their loved ones who have had a stroke. And Karen, in the previous segment, you talked about this team that you put together. You were trying to get help for your husband and realized that you needed more hands on deck. And, started to kind of scout around. And as I kind of put it, you doctor shop to find the right players to put on his team to help him get the kind of recovery that he needs. And talk a little bit about that. Were you intimidated to try to kind of step out? I know you said that's not really your personality to be afraid to speak up and say something, but, how intimidating was that to try to make those kind of steps and feel like you needed more of the team?
So because my switch to a doctor happened because of crisis, it was something that I wanted to have happen, but unfortunately we had to do it under duress. That was hard. However, once we made it to the next hospital, because literally in the ER, they kicked us out to a different hospital. They wouldn't treat him any longer, which was a tough moment. And I met the doctors at this next hospital and were happy to find how much information they had for me, how much more information they had for me at that moment than I have ever had since the beginning of the stroke, which was interesting. And that kind of had this epiphany for me that said, I knew I wasn't getting treatment, but I didn't know what to do about it. Now, that doctor was the one who helped me realize that she was a specialist in epileptic neurology, but that my husband had so many other ailments that we needed other specialists, and she helped guide me to these other people. She helped me to develop that team and really made it ever present that no one person can do everything for your survivor.
Now, when your husband first had his stroke, did you know that you were going to have to play such a hands-on role in this whole process?
Nobody does.
Sure.
Does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a big shock. I'm sure everybody on this panel right now understands that even for me, as far out as 2 years, I'm still learning how much I have to change to help my stroke survivor survive that stroke.
And as we mentioned earlier in this show, you actually come with some experience because you were a caregiver for your father.
Yeah.
Did that caregiving for him kind of help segue and prepare the road ahead that you found you had to do for your husband, or not so much?
Yes, I guess so. But, my dad had dementia and cancer and was much older. So it was a bit of a different ballgame, and also it was my father, not my husband. When It's your spouse and it's your relationship partner, whatever they are, mm-hmm. there's a different sense of loss. Mm. I mean, I definitely had a sense of loss when my dad said I was his brother, I was his son, I was, he didn't know who I was many days. That was hard. Mm-hmm. But when it's your spouse that's like that,
sure,
that's your It's just different.
Yeah,
It's
well,
different.
you would expect it from your father because he's older, and that's what happens to older people. Sometimes, stuff like that happens. But yeah, you certainly wouldn't expect that. You wouldn't expect that you're going to have to deal with that with your husband, your significant other, who's your own age, and I can only imagine.
But it did give me information as far as like bringing other caregivers in to help me, those kinds of things. I was already set up. I already had connections because I had done that for my dad. So to some extent, yes, you're right. It starts your brain thinking a certain way.
What do you think would have helped you be more prepared? Would it have been at the hospital level, before your husband got out of the hospital, if maybe the hospital or the rehab center had a little orientation, okay, before you go home, here's some do's and don'ts, or what do you think would have prepared you better?
I think if someone had told me of possible eventualities to look for and be prepared for, and just realize it would have helped because, for instance, nobody had even told me the seizures were possible. That slowed down the whole process. Maybe if I had known that was a possibility and I would have recognized it sooner, maybe treatment could have started sooner. But yeah, you're right. They send you home with a packet. They do send people to help you, kind of like transition. But each of us has our own individual path because of what Jonathan was saying. No two strokes are the same.
And you don't know what you don't know, and as we've learned, and as we've learned in all the support groups that we might participate in and things like that, strokes are very different, but some of the experiences and the after effects can be fairly common, like seizures tend to be very common. Again, had you known that seizures were possibly even going to be on the radar, you could have been a little bit more prepared, like, okay, Jonathan, like, in his case, he's like, okay, is this the seizure, honey? And in that case, the seizures came before the stroke, whereas, in some cases, stroke will come first and the seizures come later. You just don't know what to look forward to. You don't know what to look for. Certainly you're looking forward to anything. But a lot of these doctors and these hospitals do. And it would be helpful if they said, okay, now that your loved one has had a stroke, here are some other things that may, happen: mood swings, speech difficulties, all these other wonderful little gifts and things that just kind of get dropped in our lap as we go along. It'd be nice to know that some of that is, a possibility. Again, many of you in our chat here had brought up the fact about guilt. Is that something that you found yourselves dealing with immediately after the stroke, or was it, later in the recovery of the stroke?
I think you just, for me personally, I wished I would have made different decisions on the day. I don't think that guilt came for a little while till you get time to self-reflect. And when your stroke survivor is finally running through that day. I mean, it took a while for my husband to really reflect on what happened and be able to tell me what happened. Everything was a guess because he had aphasia, especially. When my husband woke up, all he could say were numbers. No words, just numbers. So I had to wait for him to develop and catch up. And then he could tell me what happened that day. And I think that's when the guilt really hit, because now I had to live what he lived. And that was emotionally difficult.
How startling was that, Karen, to see that, okay, so my husband survived the stroke. I'm now going into his room and there he is. Okay. And he's awake, but then all he says is numbers. How startling was that?
Hey, I was just glad that, they got him walking the first day. They made him walk. They made him stand up. Yeah, they were moving all his limbs and everything, but I was just happy to see him working. And the rest of it, it was tragic to try to communicate. It was tough because you could see the pain in him. He thought he was saying things to me.
Sure.
He just didn't know.
Sure.
And it was a big 20 questions guessing game. So to some extent, we tried to use a sense of humor.
And for how long did that guessing game go on for? Weeks, months type of thing?
Months.
Months. Yeah.
Months. it's pretty good now.
Mm-hmm.
We're almost at 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and he really has developed extremely well. He's still frustrated by it for sure when he can't find the words, and he mixes up pronouns, things like that. It's really difficult.
But boy, his recovery is really good compared to what you've told me, because he and I have spoken. He looks great. He sounds great.
Right. He's worked hard, and he's fortunate.
Mm-hmm. And Anne, I have to say to you on this topic, Dr. Peter, his memory was gone. I mean, he didn't know he even had a wife for 4 weeks. When he tells me that, it's like I can't even imagine. What was that like for you to see him after the surgery or whatever, and realize that he didn't even know who you are?
Well, the whole time in reflection, as Karen says, you have time to reflect. I'm not sure why we were in the hospital for 4 weeks. He was in for 4 weeks before he came home. They didn't do surgery till the 3rd week. So in hindsight, I always wonder, why was he still there? He was physically just fine. Mentally just not there at all. Didn't know who I was, didn't know where he was, couldn't recognize it was a hospital. I mean, he was just nowhere. And I think when he came home, he more or less recognized where he was. I mean, he says, "This feels familiar," which was good. But he still didn't know who I was. And he kept looking for other people that were not here. It was disturbing. And you ask, what do you wish you knew when you left the hospital? I wish I had had a psychiatrist talk to me or somebody, because I was not quite prepared for the emotional toll it was taking on me. Somebody here mentioned I think it was Tiffany, crying all the time. I mean, I was fine. And then he'd walk out of the room and I would just completely fall apart, because I wasn't prepared for that emotional. It's a gut wrencher to feel like you've lost your partner. And he was there physically and just fine physically. But if you only have the shell of the person, this is not good. Now, things turned around about 2 weeks into his home stay. His eyes lit up, and I could tell that he recognized who I was. And that was a really nice turning point to understand that he knew I was his wife, and that we'd been together a while. All those things are good things. So it does get better. But I don't think anyone really had expressed to me that there was that hope there. When we left the hospital, there was more of this is going to be you're going to go to all these therapies. This is what you will never have a schedule again, because therapies are never scheduled the same time twice, it seems. And all those things are kind of the logistics of it. And you can grapple with that. Okay, so I can rearrange my schedule. But the emotional is really hard to cope with. And I don't know what the answer is for that. Because as we keep saying, every stroke is different. So, Karen has somebody that comes home and it's all there. He just can't get it out. I had someone come home where it's not all there, and he was speaking quite well. It was just, I don't even know. And it's a journey. This group has been great, because I think it lets us vent a little bit to each other. And that has been helpful.
Trina, what do you think?
I so much agree with Anne about the need for the hospital staff to prepare us, the caregiver and the stroke survivor, emotionally for the life changes that are going to happen. And fortunately, we did have one doctor that was straight with us, and he happened to be a palliative care doctor. And Gilbert was assigned to a palliative care doctor because of the severity of his stroke. And I don't think they thought he was going to have as positive outcomes as he's had, because since he can now walk on his 2 feet with a brace and a cane, I don't think they necessarily thought that was going to happen, because we were there at the hospital for 6 weeks. They wanted him to stay another week at least after that. So it was very severe. And this palliative care doctor said, your life is going to change and you're going to suffer quite a bit after this, and you need to be prepared for that. And he said, do you have any religion, any spiritual beliefs? And I said, well, we're Catholic. And he said, oh, I'm Catholic. And he said, I'd recommend this book for you to read. And it was by C.S. Lewis and on suffering. And I was so touched by that he took that step, that personal step out in faith. So I think that was so important that the doctor took the risk of just addressing the spiritual side of life directly with us. And it just hit home to me. And that's what I needed to hear in that moment. That yes, there will be loss in our lives. There will be hard times, but that there's deeper meaning in life, and we can still go on just as other people have gone on through suffering. And he shared with me, the doctor did, that his, I think it was his father had a stroke recently. So speaking from personal experience, he could say that his faith and that spirit of perseverance and knowing that life will go on and it'll be different, but we will get through this. That really helped me to know he had gone through it personally and was empathetic towards our situation. So I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that meeting with that doctor. It was one of the most important moments.
Well, as we say here on the show, there's still a beautiful life after stroke. So, yeah, absolutely. Let's take another break. And when we come back, I want to ask you guys, just for some final thoughts and suggestions that you'd give to some of our caregiver listeners. Many of you, who are here on the panel have kind of been through the trenches, and what kind of insight can you shed on the whole caregiver situation to some of our fellow caregivers? So everybody sit tight. We'll be right back. Hey, this is Christopher Ewing, and I'd like to invite you to be a part of 2 really cool stroke support groups. If you're a caregiver, join us online every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time for the Life After Stroke Caregivers Stroke Support Group. Exclusively for caregivers, this is a time where you can connect with other caregivers from around the world and share stories and gain encouragement as you care for a loved one who has had a stroke. And if you're a stroke survivor, then join us on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Time for the Life After Stroke Online Stroke Support Group, where you'll get the chance to meet other stroke survivors and gain insight, information, and inspiration while on your road to recovery. For more information on these 2 great support groups, just go to www.thestrokechannel.tv. That's thestrokechannel.tv, because there's still a beautiful life after stroke. Hey, this is Christopher Ewing with a Life After Stroke health tip. So if you're a stroke survivor with any kind of paralysis, then you know how frustrating it can be to try to do some normal everyday tasks. Things that used to be so quick and easy now seem almost impossible to do using, let's say, our hand or our arm on our affected side. Now, I say almost impossible because in many cases, our affected arm and hand are still able to do things. We just have to give them the opportunity to do it. And we have to resist the urge to baby them, as an OT told me once, or consider them no longer able to do things all because of the stroke. Now, when I was in the hospital, I remember one of the doctors telling me, "You didn't break a bone, your arm is still there, and is just as intact as it was before your stroke. You just have to help wake those muscles back up and re-educate your brain on how to make it work, and constantly remind your arm that it is still a part of your body and that it still has a job to do." Now, that whole way of thinking really hit me one day a couple of months ago. I was at home about to go from one room to another, and as I was leaving the room, the thought crossed my mind to reach, using my left arm, my affected side, to turn the light off. And then I immediately said to myself, oh wait, I can't use that arm because it doesn't work, so I have to use my right arm to do this. And so I reached with my right arm and turned the light off. But then I immediately thought, wait a minute, how do I know if I could do that with my left arm or not? I didn't even try. So I turned the light back on using my right arm and hand, and then reached up with my left arm and hand, and taking all of 10 extra seconds at the most to do it, I turned the light off. And then I started to think, I wonder how many times could my left arm and left hand have actually done what I wanted it to do if I had just tried. So that's when I decided to implement a new rule, kind of a game, if you will, that I want you to try to do also. I call it 3 tries. Basically, the rule is that you try to do something using your affected arm or hand, and you give it 3 tries. And if you are still unable to do whatever it is after 3 tries, then you can use your non-affected arm and hand, but only after you've tried at least 3 times, no matter how long it takes. Now, of course, if you're in a hurry, then you got to do what you got to do. But seriously, whenever time allows, really make a concerted effort to use your affected arm and hand instead of just automatically using your non-affected side just because it's easier or faster. I especially implement this rule if what I want to reach for is on the affected side of my body. Basically, whatever is on my left side is my left arm and hand's responsibility, and whatever is on my right side is my right arm and hand's responsibility. I make every effort to not reach across my body to do something using my right hand if that something is on my left side. Now, if you try this little game, trust me, you will be surprised at just how much your hand and your arm can actually do if you just give it a chance to show you. Now, if you have a really cool health tip that you'd like to share with others, tell us about it. Just go to our website, www.thestrokechannel.tv. That's thestrokechannel.tv. I'm Christopher Ewing, and this has been a Life After Stroke health tip. Life After Stroke is a production of the Hang On to the Dream Foundation, the 501c3 nonprofit organization that helps kids and adults reach their goals in life. If these Life After Stroke programs are helpful to you, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the Hang On to the Dream Foundation to assist the organization in its numerous outreach activities. For more information, just go to www.hangontothedream.org. And remember, no matter how hard things seem, hang on to the dream. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Life After Stroke. I'm Christopher Ewing. And, this is really, this show could go on for hours more. There's just so much to cover. And again, for everybody listening, if you're a caregiver, I certainly want to invite you to be a part of the Caregiver Stroke Support Group that happens every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Just go to thestrokechannel.tv and you can get signed up, and we'd love to have you guys be a part of it. For those of you that are stroke survivors, our Stroke Survivor Support Group happens on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. So same thing, just go to thestrokechannel.tv and get signed up for that group. Before we close, I just kind of want to go around the horn and, if everybody could just kind of give a little, just some thoughts and some insight and some advice to all of our fellow caregiver listeners who are listening to the show. Just kind of give them a little thoughts and feelings and hints from Heloise, as I say. And we'll kind of start with you.
Okay. There really is so much, and I can't emphasize enough how important this caregiver group has been for me personally, and I think it has benefited everyone that has been participating regularly. There is hope. Things do go on. Karen mentioned finding joy. Joy is there, and people always say, look out for yourself. And as a caregiver, that's really, really, really hard to do. We don't look out for ourselves. We look out for our partner that we're caring for. And that's a journey. That's something one of our groups had mentioned. It's a role we have to redefine for ourselves. What is our life like as well? And it's making a life for both of you together and finding joy together. And as Karen had said, something about, visually distracting with beautiful things in your life, point things out. I'm more a tactile person. And one of the things when I'm falling apart, it's so important when I demand a hug, because that cognitive piece, that emotional piece is a little bit missing in my partner. And so I'll just go up and say, I need a hug, and he'll give me a hug. And that tactile piece is really important. It's a nice thing to have. And even though some of the meaning may be gone, it's still there for me. And so just, I don't even know what to say to people. I don't know what I would tell people if I met them on day one of after a stroke. It's just that we're all going through it in different ways. We're all stronger than we think we are. And the groups like this really, really help to let you vent and share.
Yeah, because, I can only imagine the pressure. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, Trina had mentioned how, there was a level of pressure in that if something happened to her, the whole house would fall apart, Do you remember saying that, Trina? Remember how you put that?
Oh, yeah. Yes. So whenever I think about like COVID, catching COVID, God forbid, or getting cancer or another fatal disease, I don't think about myself dying. That would be okay, but it's the idea that everyone else, who would take care of everyone else in the family. And so caregivers, I think we really tend to forget ourselves or disappear, just disappear out of existence, that you're only worth anything as for your labor, like taking care of everyone else.
But how much pressure does that put on you, though? To know that
tremendous.
Everything is just on your shoulders. Like if you catch a cold, and you're in bed for 24 hours, Lord knows the whole house could be upside down because your stroke survivor husband, the kids, and the whole. How much pressure do you carry around with that?
It's a constant pressure. It's a constant pressure because that's my job. That's holding everything together and advocating for everybody is my job. And I think I go overboard on that. So I have to really watch myself and be careful to realize that I'm a person too with value, with dignity, and who God created for because He loves me too. I'm not just on earth only to ensure the survival of everybody else, So it's so important for me. Me personally is I have to maintain this conversation with God daily throughout and remember, oh yes, I'm a child of God too. I do have a life's purpose that is related to caregiving, but that's not all I'm good for. I have to cultivate also my own personal understanding of myself and relationships with people and with God. So I have to make sure I don't disappear in the whole scheme of things.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you're people too, obviously, but it's interesting how you're putting it and how Ann just put it. What happens when you guys need to be watered? It's like pre-stroke, your husband might have come over and given you a little smack on the tush or a big hug, a random kiss out of nowhere or something like that. And then post-stroke, they might be sitting in the chair, half drooling on themselves, watching television for 8 hours. How do you ensure that you still get the watering that you need, the validation that you need, and not sacrifice that?
I think it's so important to be in a support group, a support community that reminds you of your own value, and also for me, I read, or I nurture other parts of myself to. With me, I'm really involved with our church, so in my spiritual life, that's a reassurance to help me gain balance that way.
And how do you kind of stay rooted in?
And I'm not religious, and so it's an interesting, because I know religion really helps a lot of people, but I try to reach out to others to do something for somebody else, because I am a caregiver at heart, and so. I've getting back into driving for Meals on Wheels, and those kind of things are important to know, that you can still be of value, you can still be a caregiver, you can still take your partner with you as you do other things. And so we're coming up on our 2-year mark, and I'm seeing us getting a little more back into what we used to do together and enjoy together. And that's important. And then, Trina reads, I sew, you try to make time for something that gives you some personal joy. And sometimes that's, 10 minutes a day, but oh, well, that's 10 minutes that you grabbed.
Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I was just, in real estate, they say that to sell a house or to buy a house, it's location, location, location. With a stroke victim, it's patience, patience, patience. And that's the thing I always have to tell myself. I have to be patient with Jan. I have to be patient because, she gets frustrated that I get frustrated if she can't say something, or else she's trying to explain something to me, and we play this 20 questions game. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where you try to figure out what they're saying. And then 90% of the time I can figure out what Jan wants to say. There's that 10% that I have no idea. Then she looks at me, she goes, oh, forget it. And she walks away, she gets upset. And then I get upset. So it's just, you have to just keep focused on, like you said, on the good things, things that give you joy, things that, Jan and I, we don't have the same kind of conversations we used to have, but unlike Karen, we laugh a lot. We just laugh a lot. And that's great. And that's what it is. Everybody can do that with their spouse or significant other. You got the battle half won.
I guess I have to say, be patient. Don't beat yourself up about being frustrated, overwhelmed, and seek as much help as you can get from the medical community. It's hard. They have a lot to do. I don't think they're doing it on purpose, but I think if you're not vocal, then you're going to miss out on some good help. And then the only other thing I would really love to know is how to find joy for my stroke survivor. I can't seem to find that and give that to him. And so that would be something I would like to know.
You can't find joy. He can't find his joy, or you can't make him joyful.
Right. I think they struggle with what's happened to them and realizing what's happened to them and coping with those changes. They're limited cognitively, at least mine is. And hopefully I'm getting him that help that helps him come to terms with it. And hopefully, little by little, that joy that I used to know in my husband will surface. And I've seen it, little hints, and so I'm hopeful. And I hope everybody else can find help to get them there.
The one thing that I always have to deal with, and that doesn't drive me nuts, but it's always, I just don't know how to always deal with my girlfriend's frustration level. It's her frustration level that really skyrockets, and she gets it when she can't find a word, or she just says, oh my God, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't take this anymore. I can't take this anymore. She starts hitting herself in the head, and what do you do?
And as a caregiver, you want to help alleviate that. Sure. I know. Yes. I always say that, a lot of you caregivers, us stroke survivors will stub our toe and you guys will say, ouch, because you'll feel our pain, and I often say that, the whole family deals with stroke. We might be the ones that have the stroke, but you caregivers are the ones that have the stroke along with us because you love us, you care about us, and you go through the stroke almost just as we do, just obviously in a different kind of way, but we're all in that kind of thing together, just as a family and as a unit, as the caregiver and as the loved one. You feel our pain just as much, and I just can't even imagine.
Jonathan, sometimes I give my husband a visual focal point when something like that happens. A photo of a joyful moment in his life, or outside if there's a beautiful bird, anything visually for him to focus on and stop that turmoil sometimes helps. I won't say it always does, but you might want to try that.
Trina, you're having a moment.
Yeah. I wanted to say to Karen that don't give up hope on that joy. because I really believe it'll come back.
Thank you, Trina.
He shared with me after, we've been almost 9 years into this, and he said probably after like 7 years, he recognized that he was in a depression during that first year. And I didn't know that that's what that was. I knew he was different, but I didn't know he was depressed. And it wasn't till after he came out of it, probably after many years, that he realized that he was feeling the loss of his function, physical function, and of his job, and being able to be with the guys every day at work. And so a lot of loss in his life. And so a lot of the frustration and anger he was expressing, that was that loss. But the joy came back, after he would gain some of the certain functions that he figured out a different way to do it, or activities that used to give him joy, like woodworking, carpentry. Those give him joy now too. And I think finding the stroke support groups and being able to talk to people who understand him, and we feels just this camaraderie and oneness of experience and soul, that he gets joy out of those interactions, those relationships.
Tiffany?
Well, being a caregiver, I have learned a lot over the last year and a half. And, you have to not take things personally from the stroke patient. At first, I was very, take everything into heart, and it's hurt so much and this and that. And of course, my husband now is 180 degrees different than when he was the man that I know before. So just kind of understanding, and to me, I find it is working for me is not talking back. When they upset, just let them be. Kind of like be quiet and do whatever you need to do. So far that kind of worked for me. I know it's very hard, and I'm still learning, and sometimes it still hurt, and I cry a lot still. But it's getting easier day by day if you can ignore the somewhat, quote unquote, ridiculous thing that your loved one, the stroke, patient is basically acting out. So that is a little, lesson learned for me, and I would like to share that, because I know that if you first encounter with all this issue, could be terrifying, hurtful, resentment, all that bad stuff. But I think over the time I get a little bit stronger and kind of understand a little bit and let things go, and again, not take things, personal.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to say that I think it's really important to mention that Gilbert and I work specifically on our relationship, and we are in a support community called Marriage Encounter, and we set aside 10 minutes every night to write to each other and to set that time aside for communication. So we just have this commitment with each other that we will not go to sleep without having that communication time to touch base. And we did it for years. We've done this. So it was even through the difficult parts of the stroke recovery time, when Gilbert's personality was different and he was still recovering of his emotional side. We just, since it was a commitment and an appointment that we made with each other, that even if it wasn't so deep, or we miss the boat with each other, it was still that perseverance, and we're still going to try to connect. And so that has helped.
Can Gilbert read and write?
Yes, he can.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, everybody listening, this show has gone longer than I thought it was, and that's okay. I mean, it could go even longer, but we'll call it here. And everybody listening, really, for those of you who are caregivers, I really encourage you to be a part of Anne's caregiver stroke support group that we have on Wednesdays. Again, it's 10 a.m. Pacific time. Go to thestrokechannel.tv and you'll be able to get logged in. And the thing I guess I would kind of leave with everybody is that, all of you caregivers, you guys basically chose us as boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, because that's how you met us. That's what you thought this was going to be. Some of you did not choose us. Some of us, you bore us, you're our moms, our dads, and things like that. So you kind of had no choice. But at the end of the day, you caregivers love us. And that just cannot be understated. I mean, you signed up for something totally different than what you thought it was going to be. Many of you got married and walked down the aisle and thought, okay, sickness or better. Yeah, I got this, no problem. Although you didn't realize how much sickness and health and better and all that it could be or not be. And you realized that while you were going to live your lives together, you didn't realize how much of that togetherness might become more of your life. You would take on more of a 50-50. It would be more like 75-25, because now we as stroke survivors need you to carry some of our load also. And you guys have stepped up, and, in our most helplessness, you guys have brought your most selflessness. And that is just so important. And I guess I just want to say that on behalf of stroke survivors, all you caregivers, we love you guys, even when we don't say it, even when we might not even show it. Just know that we know it and that it's in us. Okay. And, a life-changing event happened in our lives, and we're trying to make the best of it while still being the person that you want us to be and need us to be. And we just thank you in the midst of that you still are the person that some would say you need to be, or at least that we need you to be. And just know that if you're not told enough, I'm telling you on behalf of your stroke survivors that we love you and we appreciate you. Okay. Anyway, I can never get through one of these doggone meetings with you guys without crying. And see, all of you have yourselves on mute. I'm watching all of you laugh at me right now because you know how I get. So anyway, everybody listening, they're laughing at me on mute because they know how emotional I get. But they're also thanking me and blowing me kisses too. So I guess I'm not making too much of a fool of myself. But anyway, everybody listening, oh, Trina, please. I thought I was only one. Trina's got more tears in her eyes than I got. Come on now. All right. Whew. Okay, everybody listening, I know it's been a long time since we've done a show, but we do our support groups every week, and we've just kind of been focusing on that, just kind of stay safe and hunkered down mid-COVID, and just loving on each other, and just just staying in touch with each other that way. So we'll be doing more shows from time to time and stuff like that. But in the meantime, come hang out with us during some of our stroke support groups. Again, our caregiver one is on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific. Our stroke survivor one is on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific. Come get plugged in, come hang out with us, and we'd love to just have you join our family and be a part of us. So everybody listening, as I always say, I love you guys, I miss you guys, and just remember that there is still a beautiful life after stroke. This has been a recorded program of an actual stroke support group. The comments expressed are the opinions of the participants and not necessarily the opinions of the producers, sponsors, or the broadcasters of this show. This program is not to be used as a way to diagnose or treat any medical condition that you may have. Please consult your doctor or healthcare professional before making any changes to your current medical routine. Life After Stroke is a production of the Hang On to the Dream Foundation, the 501c3 nonprofit organization that helps kids and adults reach their goals in life. If these Life After Stroke programs are helpful to you, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the Hang On to the Dream Foundation to assist the organization in its numerous outreach activities. For more information, just go to www.hangontothedream.org. And remember, no matter how hard things seem, hang on to the dream.